Hi, this is Scott Park Phillips, and this video is my Daodejing class, which happens once a month. It's the study of the Lao Tzu, and this group of students has been studying with me for more than a year. The way I teach, I include in meditation instruction. So the Daodejing is used to teach meditation, or Orthodox Taoist meditation, of which there are two types: Zhuang, which means sitting and forgetting, and Jindan, which means golden elixir. And so it can be done, even though the name says sitting, it can be done standing as well. And everyone in this group has made a commitment to practice for 1 hour every day and to chant the Daodejing chapter that we're working on for that month. And so this is chapter 5, the straw dog chapter. And it's pretty fun. If you want, I'm going to link the PDF below, and you can check it out. You can download it if you want and follow along. That's probably the best way to do it. I start out the video talking about books, as I often do, though we talk about other subjects. When I talk about personal things, I've cut those out as much as possible. And so there's some cuts. Also, the way the video worked, it went to people's faces sometimes. So I put books up on the screen, sometimes my own book, but it's obvious because someone else is talking. And I also talk about books again at the end, and so you can follow along. You can get those books and that kind of thing. One of the first questions I got, I thought I should answer here at the beginning, because it might help orient people to what I'm doing. The Daodejing was written in about, we don't know when it was written. It was assembled, and the oldest versions of it come out of tombs, but it somewhere around 300 or 400 BCE. And there are lots of scholars who study the Daodejing as and as well as other texts from that era as a kind of biblical scholars. It's their tradition comes from the biblical tradition, so they're looking at the text as sort of a pure thing. What does it mean by itself? Which is the Protestant tradition, which is ignoring in many ways who the people were who created these texts and why they created them and what rituals they were doing. And that's really the key information. It's my view that you can't really understand these texts very well without a deep consideration of what people were doing, what they were using them for, how they understood them. And so, for instance, if you talk to these scholars and you say, hey, it's Daodejing is obviously kind of about meditation, right? They'll say, no, there's no evidence for that whatsoever. And you say, well, what about the Neya? I mean, that's like written in same time, 400, 350 BCE, and it clearly describes meditation of the type that I do, and that I think the Daodejing is specifically describing. And they'll be like, different time, different tomb, different whatever, different text collection, so not tied to it directly, right? So they'll say, you can only address the text as the text. And I think that's a huge error. I think it's far better to look at the commentaries that people wrote, jumping from era to era. So you can go back, the earliest commentaries we have, the earliest one is Han Feitze, which we deal with a little bit in this text, and I link to in the text, the PDF, if you download it. And then you have He Shanggong, which is around the 1st century BCE, and then just after that Shang-Er in the 1st or 2nd century CE, and then Wang Bi just after that, and then you get more and more commentaries up to about 2000. And that I think that it's through these commentaries that we should understand the Daodejing. And so that's what this class is about. I studied Orthodox Taoism with a guy named Liu Ming, who lived in Santa Cruz, who was a mentor to me for about 10 years. We studied together intensively. And so some of the commentaries are his. Most of the commentary is mine, based on reading other people's commentaries and my own practice. And then I include a whole bunch of, well, maybe about half of the rest of the commentary is traditional commentators, and we're discussing them. And so that's what it is. Enjoy it. And again, you can get the PDF, and I'll tell you at the end, if you like this, how the possibilities for joining a group.
So I read a few reviews of this book, and I said, oh, I better order that. And I haven't had a chance to read it or study it, but it's called, can you guys read this?
Yeah.
What's it say?
Classical Chinese for everyone. A guide for absolute
beginners.
Yeah. But I had a chance to flip through it this morning, and it does look really good. The reviewers are like, look, it's funny, and it really teaches you. So check it out. And then I'm like, well, what does it teach? Oh, well, the first lesson, the first lessons are the Analects and the Daodejing. And then it has a Chuangzi chapter. That's one of my favorite Chuangzi chapters in here. So it's like, it gets to that section. It's like, translate this. So I think it's pretty good. I'm going to recommend it, even though I haven't had a chance to read it. My guess is that I mean, looking at their word lists, I know these characters, but still, it looks fun. Did you get a chance to look at this one? Taoism, Growth of a Religion? That's by Isabelle Robinet. So this was written in the 90s and then translated into English. Pretty. I think I've got the years right. And it is it's tough, but it's not that tough to read, and it does give a sort of big overview of the movements, sort of Taoism as social movements.
Okay.
I liked it, but I don't reference it much, but it informed me, Mm-hmm. This one, of course, the Taoist Body is classic.
I read that one.
This one, China, A Religious State by John Lagerwey, is really smart. But what it does is it contextualizes Taoism in relationship to Chinese culture and the Chinese state. That's what it does. It's not about Taoism. His first book was about Taoism, and then he just started writing in Chinese because he was like, this stuff needs to be documented in Chinese. So he wrote an encyclopedia on Taoism in northern. It's like 30 volumes in Chinese on Taoism in the northern Hakka communities of Taiwan. Whoa. That's it. It's just like that small. It's like he's like a focus dude, right? But yeah, China, A Religious State is an amazing kind of overview of, so it does history, anthropology, and then his sort of imaginary, what is a Chinese village? So it's like he sort of gives you a history background from the point of view of the state, and then he shows ritual at the communal level, like examples. This village, this village, this village is super boring to read, but it's like, whoa, really? And it was like different in every single place, right? So it's sort of like, what did they have in common? Then he sort of like, what's a generic Chinese village? So it's a smart book, but it's also like, you kind of have to want to know the answer to that question, right? You kind of, All right, there we go. Heaven and earth are impartial and treat all things like straw dogs. The sage is impartial and treats people like straw dogs. The space between heaven and earth is like a bellows, empty but inexhaustible. When active, more comes out. Lots of talk is exhausting. Far better to simply hold to the center. So He Gong calls this the uses of uses of emptiness, or shu yong, like empty uses. The whole chapter can be read as a conversation about the relationship between leadership and inner stillness. So this chapter is known as the straw dog chapter, and well, I really got this from Liu Ming. Liu Ming's take on it was that it's the sort of summary chapter of Han Fei Tzu, who's known as the legalist. I put the link in there, didn't I? I put a link because you can read like the entirety now of Han Fei online for free. It's a terrible translation, but there's the Chinese characters. And before that, this is what I was working with, the Burton Watson, Columbia University text, which doesn't really have the Daodejing commentaries in it. So I didn't realize how haphazard the Daodejing commentaries were until I found that thing online. They don't follow any order, and it's.
What is the Han Fei?
Okay, so Han Fei is they call him the legalist school, the head of the legalist school, and it's the oldest commentary on the Daodejing. It's not complete, but Han Fei. Han Fei is like we think of like right wing. He's like, make the laws really clear. Make them the way people are already. Don't try to use the law to change the way people are. But make the laws really clear. And if someone breaks the law, kill him. Like harsh punishments, like execution for jaywalking. Basically. But if you do that, after 60 years, no one will ever think of jaywalking. It won't even enter their minds. Han Fei is probably, other than Confucius, had the biggest influence on governments in Asia, Vietnam, Japan, Korea. His voice is always there as the, make your rulership really clear and people won't oppose you. It's very much a book about how to stay in power. In fact, I think one of the most famous sections that is in the Burton Watson is his list of I think it's 14 ways to know whether or not you are in power, because you could just be a figurehead and not know it. In fact, that would be the norm. So it's like a list of ways to know if you're in power or not. And not going to say it has that much usefulness for our daily lives. But one of them is you have no intimates. Right. You can't, he figured you can't really be in power if you have intimates. Which is because he also basically, besides making like law has to be super, super clear, he said for the king can do whatever they want. And should. So there's a famous story of Han Fei's advising the king of to execute his son for breaking the rules. And the king did that, but then also executed Han Fei. So, okay. Anyway. Oh, no.
End of story.
Yeah. All right. So, but I went ahead and took a Jindan take on this. So, stillness is the charisma of leadership. So, I mean, how do you know you're dealing with a leader? Is, you know, it's the person in the room who has inner stillness. And in times of stress, people are drawn to people who have inner stillness. And so, you know, stillness, you know, Jin, that's what I'm saying. In stillness, Jing and Qi distill, right? So you get a Qi buffer. I've been thinking about buffers a lot. So Qi, we get a Qi buffer around us that allows the spatial mind to move fast and or the body to move fast without freezing or locking up. Stillness without words, emptiness, not knowing, is always accessible and inexhaustible. I'm summarizing the chapter from a golden elixir point of view here. Because the bellows is this image of always available. This always available experience, which, so I'm like, practice an hour every day. That's the instruction. But I think if we're looking at Dzogchen, or like I've been having these conversations with Rory Miller about like, why do people think they need to meditate after they've gotten it? If they got access to the always there, why would they need to meditate anymore? And it's an ongoing argument.
Why not?
Well, yeah, but it's not progressive, so you can't go further. And so, well, what he's saying is that if you can't do it while you're having a conversation or while you're fighting, if you can't have inner stillness or the experience of meditation while you're fighting, then you're just not very good at it. He's kind of treating people like straw dogs. He's like, what, you don't get it? What, you think meditation's going to help you? Like, that's like the easiest way to get the experience. Right? That's anyway, it's good talking to Rory because he has this kind of, he's autistic a little bit, right? I don't, that's probably not the right word, but you know, he has a kind of like, doesn't read people socially, so he had to teach himself to. So in some ways, he's much better at it than people who have it intuitively. And he very much thinks that meditation is about when you don't have words in your mind. When words are gone. Sarah's telling me that that's in the New Testament. We get.
So are ideas the same as words?
Yes. I like trying to stay within a tradition, but it's impossible in this particular era not to have some kind of broader universal view. It keeps coming up. It's not going to stop coming up. All right. So in the text, just pointing out, we see these patterns just so that you understand what I did with the translation here. You know, heaven and earth is a parallel with the 10,000 things. in the same way that the sage is a parallel with the 100 surnames. I just translated it as people. Some people say all people or all the people, but it's literally the 100 surnames.
All y'all.
Yeah, yeah. I think I did a good job with this translation. I don't always feel that way, but this time I do. Impartial. So then impartial is kind of a key word here. Lots of people translate it as not kind or inhumane. It's literally is not kind, but people translate it as inhumane. And then you also see unsentimental, unsympathetic, lacking in empathy, and ruthlessness. The Confucian, this is a term that is used by Confucius a lot, and he uses it to mean love, benevolence, human-heartedness, true manhood. Anyway, yeah, what else in the, so then the space between heaven and earth is like a bellows. Most people are pretty clear about that. It's a bellows used for metallurgy. The term could mean a gate rather than a space, but most people translate it as something like a space.
What word?
The word space here.
Okay.
It's like a gate between heaven and earth. You know, the literal text could mean that, but almost everybody says it refers to the space. So empty is the term shu, empty but inexhaustible. So inexhaustible, the very common translation, most people use it, but the literal text says, that it doesn't deform. And I like that from a martial arts point of view, because or a dance point of view, because it means, keeping your frame or keeping your potential. It's like that the Jing element doesn't collapse just because the Qi element is very free and always accessible. The Jing element maintains its integrity. So I didn't see any way to put that in the translation, but I was kind of excited by noticing that. And I think it's in the, again, if you're, you could try, for instance, reading empty but inexhaustible as empty but producing Jing or reproducing Jing, something like that. When it gets, a lot of people would say when it gets pumped, because that's the implication, the pumping the bellows. I just said when it's active, more comes out. But you also see translations that are like, when it's pumped, it blows, stuff like that. I mean, it's a lot of ways you could go. Okay, so lots of talk is exhausting. Duo, the first word duo means many or lots or duo sha hao in Chinese is how much is that? It's one of the first things you learn, right? When you learn Chinese, duo. So, and there's the term, the characters is some character variants because yan, the word for talk here is yan or one, depending on the text, which version of the Daodejing we're looking at. And it's a character variant. And so, like the author, I think I've mentioned this author before, that the contemporary author Mo Yan means don't speak. His name means don't speak. So Yan means to speak, but it also can mean words. And one here means to question. So it could be lots of questions are exhausting. And again, the exhausting and inexhaustible. This is us trying to get it into English, and I'm following what most translators have done here. But it really means like literally like counts as poor. That sounds terrible in English. So, and so I went, I decided to do a really free form translation just to test it out. And it's, yapping is lame. Better to sit still. So I don't know if you guys appreciate that, but
Sounds like my grandmother.
yeah. I added the word simply because I just felt that, I mean, it's not in the text, but I just felt that's the point here, isn't sort of command you to hold the center. And I even found this sort of far better. Like I don't think that the text is saying it's a heightened thing. I think it's just saying if you have a choice, just sit still. Maybe something like that. I think it's lighter. I added simply because I didn't think it was meant to be so stark. Some translators take this as a direct hit or challenge to Confucius' idea of great learning. Wang Bi, who is really like the Confucian translator, does this. I have his commentary below. Also, Red Pine noticed the term "not," right, translated as or also means a fruit that has no or seed. So, since the center or a seed of seeds of a fruit are what reproduces it, sort of like are eternal, right? Their fruition is there without needing to be replanted. I think he was right to point that out because it does have that sensibility. I also kind of like this. I tend to go with the tough line here. So tough line is humans are pawns. Maybe somewhere in between. I don't know. The soft line is everything plays a role in the great scheme of things. You know, take the long view. So we're straw dogs because we're just like some kind of mite on a flea's ear. You know, in a giant desert. You know. What? You think that's funny? Okay, so straw dogs were used as sacrifice. Straw stuff like this is still used in China. And by the way, real dogs are still used as sacrifice in China. Straw dogs were used, well, they're used in a lot of different ways than we probably don't know. But one way they were used, according to various texts, is they were used as a sacrifice to make it rain. And I thought it's worth pointing out sort of in astrology that dragons and dogs are juxtaposed. Sarah's a dragon. She's like going, yeah, duh. And dogs are just really loyal and but they're small. They're energetic, but they're small. And dragons are like, big and they take up all the space. So they say that like that's the worst marriage. Like is a dragon and dog. I'm guessing that has something to do with dogs being used as sacrifice for dragons, because dragons are what makes rain. Dragons are the rain gods. Nagas all in Southeast Asia, South Asia. So straw dogs replaced real dogs or black dogs as sacrifices, which were a replacement for human beings as sacrifice. And so straw dogs are symbolically our people, kind of ritual scapegoat. So that gives the chapter a lot of potency if you think that, that you could treat all things as a kind of mythic human. Like, so you can have a conversation with a rock or a book or table or a tree, right? Because heaven and earth treat things as if they were a mythic human. And the same time, the sage treats humans as if they were, a mythic thing, something which is a whole bunch of stories collected.
Scott, that kind of view is common to a lot of shamanic traditions.
So, the animist part of it?
Yeah, see,
yeah, that's what it means. That's what animism means.
Okay.
And I think that that's the default religion, right? And then we get these worldwide, and that's like a total generalization that I can't prove, and I don't think anybody can prove it. But not yet. But that it does seem to be sort of the background for the creation of other religions. And I recently read a book called The End of Sacrifice that really talks about this period, the same time that the Zhang Daoling is founding Orthodox Taoism in 50 CE. You're getting between 50 CE and 200 CE, you're getting in the Middle East, you're getting the creation of Christianity as the end of sacrifice, a form of Judaism that ends sacrifice. And then Judaism itself ends sacrifice as well. So you see the split where Judaism becomes the ritual tradition and Christianity becomes this idea that it's your beliefs that matter, but working from the same core text. They're both working from the same core text, splitting on that issue, but agreeing to end sacrifice. And that the book is also about how that movement to end sacrifice happened in Greek, what we call paganism as well. The Hellenic world ended sacrifice as well. So while human sacrifice does still happen, it was largely ended worldwide. And I think that this chapter is really interesting because, Taoists in a sense get credit. If you take like a really classic 1990s professor, they're still around, class in Chinese early history, you can still take these classes. One of the things they'll make you read is a text where this Taoist is having a fight with a shaman, basically, about whether or not they should sacrifice a virgin in the river to stop the floods. And the Taoist ends up throwing the shaman in the river. Basically, that's the story everybody reads. So like, if you talk to somebody who went to a good school, they'll have heard that story. I don't know. I ran into someone the other day and I was like, "Oh, you went to a good school. You must know this story." And sure enough, so it's a that's a very small part of the story, but that human sacrifice was dynamic. They weren't stupid people. They were doing human sacrifice because it created a really dynamic relationship with the world they were in, where people, I mean, I can't say I know exactly what that was like, but I trust that human beings in those days were doing something that was meaningful, was really meaningful. And so when we ended sacrifice, something happened, right? It became, the sacrifice became symbolic. And so you could, at the very least, say that this chapter is saying that the sage is aware of that the original act was to sacrifice a person, and that the dynamic relationship we have with nature now requires that we bring a kind of depth of stories, depth of mythology with us into the ways we interact with people. Anyway, I'm kind of going off here, but I do think that that's like what makes this chapter exciting, because you're just going to chant it and you're going to be like, oh, the sage is impartial and treats people like straw dogs, and move on to the next line. And I think that that's like super rich idea.
It seems Zhuang itself is kind of a sacrifice.
Say more.
In the sense that we're sacrificing all concept.
Because they were sacrificing an hour a day of hard work.
No, I mean, we're sacrificing all concept, all story. Like we're kind of, in stillness. We're sacrificing action to be in stillness. It's just an interesting way to look at it. Like,
so I could make this a little more positivist by treating people, or some people say view or see. I chose treat, but it could be the other one. Maybe it means the sage actually gets people to make new myths, right? By seeing people as myths, he actually creates new ones, creates new stories, like turns people's stories around. Right? Something like that. I know, kind of therapeutic. But it's like, because it's juxtaposed with the bellows, right? This like, I open it up, story's gone. Oh, here comes a new story. Story's gone. Oh, here comes a new story, right? It's like, so the straw dog is like a person that has just this massive number of stories, and you just set it on fire and just burn all the stories. And they're like, oh, create a new straw dog, to load stories onto, and then, so I'm trying to suggest that that's a very dynamic, because if you think about a straw dog, right, you set it on fire, and then you take the bellows and you're like, blow it up, it suddenly explodes with fire. I'm not sure that that's meant to be there, but that's one of the things I thought of here.
Scott, I might have missed it. Did you go over your thoughts on the purpose of actual sacrifice in the first place in the shamanic traditions?
So,
or the reasoning behind it?
Yeah, the reasoning. Yeah, there we go. So let me take a stab. I didn't actually. Let me take a stab. So the world is full of spirits of unseen forces that are like ancestors, that are like animal forces, that are like weather. They're all these things, and they're animated, meaning they're also personified in some sense. And that maybe is a spontaneously arising quality of human beings. Like that's just something that arises. That's why it's arose in many different places. It was the way we survived. And this idea that you might have people within your community, a specialist who is good at accessing these spirits to empower themselves or the community in some way. And so these spirits are require, like, how do you reach them? Well, you start sacrificing yourself symbolically. Like from the shamanic traditions we know, you dance in a circle for 2 days, right? Or you drum yourself into trance while you're taking drugs or alcohol or something like that. It's sort of a journey toward death. Some extreme act, maybe no eating for a long time, or no drinking, and that you get access to this what we might call a mythic world, and that these deities then want you to subordinate. They'll give you their power, but they want you to subordinate to them. And the shaman might be tricky, like get some control over them over time, the great shaman, idea of the great shaman. But the basic shaman is sacrificing something, is giving some life to them so that they will give some power back. Have you seen the Indonesian daggers? Right. This is true. This was true in China for sure too. And if you watch that movie, it was really famous a few years ago. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. So watch the movie from the point of view of the sword. Don't see it as a love story. Don't see it as a whatever else, that action movie. Think about it as the story of the sword that has its own will. And how do swords get will? By stabbing people and taking their spirits, right? And so that's, I think the sword's name is Jade Fate, like jade meaning something that changes very slowly over a very long period of time, but you can see the swirls, right? So like, it's like this sword is going to outlive everybody, and it's going to take souls all along the way. And that's the same idea in the Indonesian. Those wiggly daggers, they're wiggly because they have so much spirit in them. So yeah, did I get close to answering that question?
Yes.
Okay, we can come back. But I mean, there's a really key point here, which is that Zhang Daolin comes along, and he reads that he has five. Sorry, before the age of 10, he has 5 shamanic teachers. He goes west. He goes into a cave on Crane Call Mountain, which I got to visit, and he has and he reads the Daodejing, and he comes out and he goes, I met with the source of the Daodejing. It's gotten a little bit hard to read because it's old. So I'm going to teach it, but if you can read, you must read this book, and I'll start teaching people to read so they can read it. And so it's like the first literacy program, and what he does is he pairs all of the words for heavenly things and earthly things. And if there's something that doesn't have a pair, he did a ritual to bury them under the mountain. That's the story. It's really obscure, but it's like he paired things. So if you have the heavenly things are like the myths we tell about them, and the earthly things are like the being we have an interaction with, right? So like the tiger you could actually meet. It was the largest. It wasn't like car accident. It was like car accidents today. The most likely way you're going to get killed is a car accident. Then it was tigers. So you could meet a tiger, and then there's the story about a tiger, which was the dragon. Like that these were two, because if you meet a tiger, there's a good chance you're going to die. So there's this sort of the dragon is the tiger, so they can exist together because they're matched. There's a heaven version and an earth version. That's the sort of story. But if you just had a being that had no story, that should be buried under the earth. Or if you have something that's just mythic, has no earthly correlate, that should be buried under. So Zhang Daodejing in a way represents a kind of strange kind of rationalism. And then he also ends sacrifice, like all blood sacrifice. He said any deity, so he's like responding to shamanism, right? He says any deity or spirit that requires a blood sacrifice is a demon. Don't give them anything. Starve them or imprison them. And that's the second revelation. It's called the second revelation of Zhang Daodejing. Do you know what the first one was?
No.
You guys don't remember this?
No.
Bad students. Okay, so the first revelation is don't get in the way of the people's relationship to heaven. Don't insert yourself in the people's direct relationship with heaven.
I know that, but I didn't know it was the first revelation.
I have to check too. First, second, whatever. But pretty key one.
Yeah, it's
So
the
he was
start of
like
all-
Martin Luther.
Oh, God. So do you see what they're doing here?
Say the opposite.
Yeah.
He's definitely not a missionary.
Yeah, he's not a missionary. He's just like, learn to read, everybody.
Is that a missionary learning to read?
No, I mean, we talked about this. He was creating a multi-ethnic state after he gathered a pretty decent following. He was like, well, we now control this area. Let's set it up the way we want to. It should be obvious at this point that the sage treats people as if their identities were transient. Which is a really cool precept. You know, if you meet someone and they're like, I'm this, this, and this, you know, I am telling you what I am, you know, and usually my response is, all right, well, I'm going to try to see the real person, not the possessed one, right? I'm going to just be like, well, what do you have to say about the world? You know, what do you actually do? Because your identity is not you. And then I wrote this. The sage sees birth and death in a person. A sage sees a person's exalted social heights and their degraded death by fire or being discarded and forgotten simultaneously. So this is one of the meanings of qi. That you can see the time. You can see the time of a person. You can look at a person and see their development. You can see their evolution. You can see their birth. You can see their death. You can see their demise. That you're seeing all of it at once. That it has a kind of quality. That it's there. That's a meaning of qi, is that it's not just someone's presence in the moment, It's the sort of totality of their presence, that their presence has all the elements of the past and the future in it, something like that. Because bellows are empty, they are infinitely responsive. They constantly give and return to emptiness. Heaven and earth are impartial, that is, without preference. So again, it's a description of meditation. The bellows is your breathing. Heaven and earth do not kill out of cruelty. They don't give birth out of kindness. If heaven and earth has a reason, we don't know it, or no one knows it. Sage treats people like dressed up and decorated effigies, giving them lots of attention at first and then discarding them to be trampled over in the street or burned up to communicate with the heavens. So, well, I just kind of threw these out there with question marks because I think it's clearly implied.
It's clearly implied.
Yeah, the implication that is implied, and you're supposed to sort of grapple with that.
Like that you are the sage and you're burning up your own
They can't.
desires, you're burning up your own thoughts about yourself.
So Sarah's saying all these interesting things that you can't hear. Say them one at a time. I'll repeat them.
Well, that seems like a meditation thing in there where you are.
It's a meditation where you are the sage and you're burning up your thoughts one at a time.
Or burning up your dressed up decorative.
Or you're burning up the part of you that's a dressed up decorative effigy. Yeah, that's good.
And that's the notion of sacrifice I had in mind before.
Yeah. Well, that's good. That's good.
Wasn't there also a chapter we read a few months ago about how the earth is a ceremonial vessel or something like that? Although it's hard to tell. It doesn't feel positive or negative. It just feels like weird.
Yeah, I mean, like the body is a vessel, is a sacrificial vessel. The whole earth is a sacrificial vessel, which is also to say it's a stage, right? This is sort of like stage for street performance or something. It's potent stuff. Okay, the Huayanzi, which is, another, some would say the second most important Taoist text, says, when we make straw dogs or clay dragons, we paint them with yellow and blue, decorate them with brocade, and tie red ribbons around them. The feng shui, or ritual experts of that time, who are also alchemists, they would put on a black robe, and then the headman would put on a hat, and they would invite the spirits and send them off. But once they're used, they are nothing but clay and straw. So this is describing a version of the ritual. Again, this book actually is a good source for trying to understand the generic ritual, which is that there are some form of leader, whether it's a king or a local headman or something. And there's a ritual expert, which becomes the Taoist later, but originally is this feng shui character, which, some kind of ritual expert. And the Chinese themselves have been, in the 20th century, have been really reluctant to translate these texts or try to understand who these people were. So I would say that we probably will get some picture of it in the next 20 years. But they were a diverse group of experts on alchemy of both physical alchemy and contacting spirits, and they crossed a lot of different lines. And I think Taoism comes along and just clarifies like what the subject is and isn't. So they're shaman, they're mix, ritual expert shaman, something. But they would do a ritual where the headman would officiate as the recipient of the blessing on behalf of the whole community. That's sort of what's going on there. And so the blessing in the shamanic world is from subordination to the spirits. And in the Taoist world, it's from commanding harmony, you might say, using the soldiers of the four directions to resolve disharmony. Something like that. Humans are not exceptional. Heaven and earth treats us the same as all other things. So the sage avoids moral judgments based on artificial human institutions and status. Yeah, this is sort of me summarizing what a bunch of different people have said. Oh, actually, you know who this is summarizing more than anybody is Roger Ames, who tries to take a philosophical look at this, and I think pretty much fails. So I didn't translate his stuff, but I did try to summarize that one point. I summarized that one point, which is that maybe a sagely outlook is a distant outlook. So stepping back from the emotionality and intensity of, and Confucius would say something like this too, of, the desperation and the survival impulse, and getting a clear view of it. It takes into account human institutions, but it isn't controlled by them. So the look is fresh. A few of the more philosophical commentators try to talk about the practice of seeing people as straw dogs as a kind of rejection of the artificiality of human institutions. Well, I think they're reading too much into this. I don't like that seems so Protestant, that's like, oh, sacrificing straw dogs, that's bad, that's represents the bad part of institutions we have to get rid of. I just don't see it. But I don't think that they realize that they're imposing that on the text either, which is itself interesting, right? Because they are straw dogs, because I'm seeing them as straw dogs. All right. So then I gave you the reference for Han Faith's here online if you want to check it out. Seeing voids, emptiness, seeing what isn't there. Oh, I've been doing this. This is sort of an aside. I've just been doing this experiment. So there's, again, it's actually Rory Miller exercise. Look at an object, like pick up an object or see an object, and think of 20 things you can do with it that aren't what people normally do with it. Like look at a spoon and come up with 20 things you can do with it. You could sharp it and use it for carving wood. You can use it as an earring if you bend it and hold it on. 20 things, just go, and that as a kind of mental exercise to just see the world come alive, right? We're talking about the animated world. That's one way to make the world more animated. It's just whenever you look at things, like think of other things that things could be used for. And so in that vein, I was doing something different, which is like looking for the voids, looking for what isn't done, looking for what isn't thought. And I happened to be doing this the other day when I was driving to to where I practice in the morning. And on the radio, they were talking about, all these people are afraid of us being replaced by robots. And I just looked out. And I just saw like things that needed to be done, like tons of stuff that wasn't getting done. I was just driving. I was like looking, I was like, oh no, there's so much work that needs to be done here. And I thought, man, if these people would just come to my house, they would see there are so much work, so many things to be repaired, like basically everybody I know is a to-do list. And everybody has a to-do list in their to-do list and another to-do list inside that to-do list if they ever get done. Like with the first two, like we're all just this, like we've talked about humans being like, their commitments, but you could also just say we're a bunch of to-do lists. And so I was like, if a robot came along and took away my first to-do list, trust me, I got another one underneath. It's not a problem. Anyway, that was sort of like, and then so then I
Are robots going to be the new straw dogs?
right. I mean, yeah, isn't that what an interesting idea? Certainly we have that. Okay, we certainly are doing that right now in our science fiction, is looking at people as robots, right? That we're just a flesh robot, with a bunch of chemical reactions. I also been doing the same thing with buffers, thinking about how objects need buffers. Like we all know to keep our knives in a drawer or up high where children can't get to them. And we have a whole set of teaching protocols for how you learn how to use a knife. So buffers around, there's lots and lots of buffers around safety. All devices have to have safety things around them, safety designs. But there's buffers to ideas. Like if I'm going to present an idea, I need to have a 2-hour window to do it. I'm not just going to be like, oh, this chapter, it's about the straw dog. Leave it, right? Created a buffer around it. So there's also time. And those are different than borders or boundaries, right? Like a chaperone is a buffer, not a boundary. Boundary is like, I told you, don't put your hand on my knee, right? Chaperone is there to see that the thought doesn't come up, or trying to make this clear, but anyway, it's a similar idea that you can sort of look at the world by its empty spaces. You can look at the world by its buffers. Yeah. We have buffers around birth and death. And a lot of the time the buffer, we don't have a good buffer, so we just have too much of a buffer. That's another problem. All right, here's Wang Bi's commentary. I will read it. Heaven and earth follow nature, or ziran, spontaneity. Without action or creation, all things rule each other by or of themselves. Therefore, they are without kindness. Kindness creates, upholds, administers, and changes with grace and action. The created, upheld, administered, and changed things will lose their true nature. With grace and action, things cease to coexist. So Wang Bi usually takes a really straight, sort of tries to create a Confucian spin on it, but here he goes really cosmological. With grace and action, things cease to coexist. If things cease to coexist, then there is not enough to support them all. The earth does not grow straw for beasts, but the beasts eat the straw anyway. Heaven does not produce dogs for man, but men eat dogs. Wu Wei in regard to all things means to let them do as they do. Then they will be self-sufficient. If one has to use wisdom, it will not work. So I thought that was kind of cool. Wang Bi really found his Taoist here. And I'm not even going to go into that aside, but I put an aside there. Gong, people value people highly, but heaven and earth see them as grass and straw for dogs and farm animals. Gong, oh dear. Heaven and earth do not expect reciprocity. The sage loves and cares for people, but not out of mercy or benevolence, but rather following heaven and earth. It simply arises spontaneously from their nature, right? The care and kindness, loving care is spontaneously arising. It's not an act of artifice. A sage also does not honor people with any sense of reciprocal expectations in their minds. This is outlined in another chapter, which I think I'll do soon, called the sage holds the left side of the tally. Like, the sage has the capacity to call in all the favors he wants, but then doesn't do it. Harmonious qi flows between heaven and earth because it is hollow and empty. So Kong Shu, those two characters. By being light on desires, emotions, and stimulating foods, the 5 organs are purified and filled with Shen Ming, luminosity. And we've had a bunch of talks about Shen Ming before. Too much work harms the spirit. Too many words harms the body. Whenever your mouth hangs open and your tongue wiggles, disaster follows.
I like that.
I mean, it's definitely like the back off,
How can you tell if a politician's lying? He opens his mouth.
Yeah. They open their mouth and lies fall out. Better to guard your de, your Dao de. Better to guard your de, your center. Nurture your Jing Shan, your Jing Shan. Some people have separated them in the text, but it looks like one word. Better nurture your Jing Shan, treasure your Qi, and don't talk. He has this idea of the organs. We've talked about it before. I'm pretty sure I brought up, whoa, these books are falling. Don't fall. This is from the Neijing, the Claude Loré. You can see that? You can.
You're too high. Down, lower. Lower it down so I can't see that.
No. I was trying to show you the title. I mean, the authors, Claude Loré and Elizabeth Rocher, have done a bunch of these books. I don't know. They're kind of weird. They're weird. Wouldn't you say that, Michael? You've read these, right? Mm-hmm. They're weird. This is a translation of the Neijing. Oh, sorry, yeah. It's a Neijing, right? Yeah. The book of medicine, which Barnett Wells thinks was created as an argument for why they should go to war, like a justification. He doesn't think that the text is really about medicine. That's kind of funny, but
Wait, say that again? Thinks the text is
it is an allegory for why they should go to war, why this one group of people should attack another group, and that and that, you know, it's basically like such an abstract text that that people started using it to teach medicine. Look, Michael, I'm not taking a stand on this.
No, I know. I've just never heard that before.
Yeah, no, I know. Well, he wrote a thing about it, and
Right.
anyway, yeah, I like Marnix for that reason. He like doesn't care, doesn't even know he's pushing people's buttons. The secret of the secret trees of the golden orchid is this one. Well, okay, so what it talks about is in this book, it really talks about what happens when the organs overflow. So it's just it's kind of an interesting take. I mean, their basic thing was like these two authors, modern medicine is going to solve all that like disease stuff, but emotions cause people problems. So let's treat the emotions in kind of the physical realm, and acupuncture is really good for that. That's sort of their spin. I'm not sure where they're at now because they're still alive. But when they wrote this, that was kind of their spin. And so it's about the organs overflowing. And I have a comment. How am I doing for time? I'm all right. I have a sort of thought about that because I've been doing all this Ghanaian dance. I performed Friday night. I don't know. It's really fun because it's like it's really the dance of people who have like more jing than anybody. You know, it's like I've got the most jing kind of dances, and so it's just explosive, bouncy energy, and so it remakes your body. Right. And the drums keep your mind like there's constant information coming from the drums. You have to be in a kind of whether I call it a trance or meditation state. You have to be spatially aware of the people around you. You have to know where they are and what they're doing, and you have to be listening closely to the drum because it's changing. The drums are rarely static. They're constantly changing rhythms. They're giving you signals. So anyway, just doing a ton of like torso mobility because a great deal of the movement comes from the back, from some sudden movement from the back, almost as if you're being ridden. And so in my push hands teaching, like I've been doing push hands classes, and it's like I just realized another layer of aggression dropped away in that I had been doing these like I wasn't going like pushing from my whole torso like that, but I had these just using little bits of my torso to push. Like I'd stop pushing from my arms or my legs, but I was still using little bits of energy from my torso. And it just stopped because I'd been using the torso so much. I was like, I need to stop that. And then I realized, oh, wow, that was a whole layer of aggression that I'd been adding that doesn't need to be there. And really cool, like, magic trick effects from dropping that level of aggression. And so when I was reading this, I was thinking about that. I was like, oh, they're talking about the organs overflowing, with emotion out into space, right? That's what they're talking about in this book. And that seems to be what Husheng Gong is referencing here. But I thought of it also just in the sense of like what the torso does. The torso, in a sense, is overflowing with kind of aggression. That to be normal, you have to suppress, like don't move your torso, right? Then you let your torso move and it overdoes it. So there's an interesting quality of like moving my torso a lot, really intense, vigorous torso movement, and then like returning to zero and realizing that how much, aggression I normally exert. Or even just sitting in front of a computer, like, what kind of torso tension are you carrying? To bring it back to Chen Manqing's thing about not being able to pass the qi up the back or up the neck, seems to me the only thing that could stop that would be some kind of aggression, overflowing aggression out of the torso. Good tie-in. You guys. All right. Okay, this is good. So this is a commentary from a fairly, it's not a particularly old commentary, but it's from the patriarch of Longmen, or the Dragon Gate, group of Zhuangzhen, perfect reality Taoists. And this commentary on the Daodejing was a favorite of the Kangxi Emperor. Kangxi was pretty famous as a patron of the arts. Of course, he was a conqueror. He was a Manchu conqueror, so conquering the Han people. But he also lived for a really long time. So he was able to implement a lot of this Han Fei type of stuff, and see its fruition. Make really strict rules and then just wait. If your mouth does not talk too much, if our mouth does not talk too much, our spirit stays in our heart. If our ears do not hear too much, our jing stays in our genitals. In the course of time, jing becomes qi, qi becomes chun, and chun returns to emptiness. Also, great evidence that the emperor was practicing the golden elixir. All right, should we do the Shangar commentary? No protests in advance?
What is Zhang'er supposed to be spicier?
Well, I've given a lot of emphasis to Shangar, but the last maybe 2 or 3 chapters didn't have much Shangar commentary, or didn't have any. So I like Shangar because he's such a strong voice, and this is the beginning of his commentary, so it's actually starts out kind of harder, and also because I think that mostly scholars, the scholarly view of what the Daodejing is, when they read the Shangar, they're like, oh my God, he has no idea what it's about. Like, that's their reaction because they're not seeing it from a practice point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's a really interesting voice to read, even though sometimes he might go too far. The sage is, and also he often will take a completely opposite view, which is also fascinating. The sage is humane to good people and inhumane to evil people.
Justice.
That's pretty opposite of what everybody else says. When a country's governance becomes destructive, the sage views the king as a straw dog. People should accumulate meritorious actions, gong fu basically, so that their jingshan can communicate with heaven. In this way, when people try to attack and injure them, heaven will come to their aid. Well, let's just stop for a second. What on earth is he talking about, using your jingshan to communicate with heaven? Michael, I see you have a strong opinion.
No, I'm just mulling that over a little bit. I mean, the Jingshan is animated by heaven.
So
that's one idea.
Yeah, right? So it's like Jingshan is this potentiality that that you kind of welcome in through good conduct, or through following your nature, something like that. And then heaven sort of brings luminosity to you.
Right.
Yeah?
That's a very Confucius idea.
What's the medical take?
Well, in classical medicine, the idea would be to be in in right relationship with heaven, but what that means is to be in right time. That, you know, everything has to be in its right timing, or in its right time.
So the idea here is that we're in a reciprocal relationship with everything, right? The Confucian idea that I'm in a reciprocal relationship with my father and my wife is extended to all things, to the entire cosmos. And so that part of me which connects me to everything is called Jingshan. Right? It's like the interface or something between me and all things, which is reciprocal. So universe causes things to happen to me, and I cause the universe to happen. There's no separation. It's a description of extraordinary potency. So if a meteor hits the Earth, that was you. Now, maybe it's because
It's your fault.
you had too much like almond milk on your granola, like, and that reciprocity came down as a meteor. Like, we don't know. Nobody knows, but it's an assumption about the potency of ritual action. That the influence must be there. We just can't see it. Okay.
So this is in opposition to Hushangong's statement that heaven and earth do not expect reciprocity?
They don't expect it. It's just true.
Isn't that an expectation? Truth?
It's inescapable.
Right.
Hey, I think these two worldviews did exist simultaneously,
Uh-huh.
right? And they exist simultaneously in the text. I'll keep going. So this is, if someone who accumulates merit, then is able to communicate with heaven through their Jingshan. Normal people are not in touch with this opportunity. So heaven is just unaware of them. And then I summarized this a little bit because it was just too complicated in the text, but they are akin to robbers who dare not to be seen by government officials. So. The Yellow Emperor, right? Who's the author of this book, technically? The guy who talks about organs. The Yellow Emperor was humane and could see where future generations were headed. Now, I had trouble with this. Was he seeing the future, or was he just seeing the trends? I think it means more he was seeing the trends, but they don't make a strict distinction. Anyway, the Yellow Emperor had that ability, and he was humane. So he made straw dogs to hang above the gates. He was trying to tell people, right, through his kind of mythic representation, he was trying to tell people that in the future, everyone would be a straw dog. You would leave reality and be in a mythic zone, okay? But people didn't understand what he was trying to teach them, and they merely just copied the practice and started making straw dogs and putting them up above the door, and they did nothing to reform the evil in their hearts. This was great evil. And later he talks in the text, he talks about the disciples of the straw dog. It's like almost comic book type stuff. Anyway, the clear, subtle, infinite, and invisible chi produced by heaven and earth is received in reverence by all blood-bearing beings. Only the ignorant do not see this. Those possessing great knowledge, and he uses the Confucian language here, are superficial and ornate. They do not know how to hold to the Tao or how to perfect the body. Once they live out their allotted years, they are inevitably depleted. Again and again, this happens. It's better to study life and maintain the center in harmony with Tao. Anybody want to comment on Chang'er? Should we just let it hang?
Just let it hang like a straw dog.
It's, it's admonitions, right? Remember the story. I repeat this many times, but I'll repeat it again. Chang'er rides out on the open plain to meet Cao Cao, who's conquering this place his great grandfather set up, this country, and he surrenders. But he says, my condition of surrender is that you spread my Taoist priests, we call them libationers. Because they did some pouring of just plain water as part of their ritual. But he said, if you spread them all over the country, we'll surrender. And Cao Cao said, yeah, sure. That's better than a fight. Or liked him, which is also possible. And so this text is written after they were spread all over the country. That's why we have it, because he had a bunch of copies made and he sent them out to people. So that they're like admonitions. They're like, hey, don't forget, just because you're reading the Daodejing, don't forget what it means. Something like that. We agreed. That's his voice. We already agreed to this. Don't forget. Anyway, potent stuff. Liu Ming, I've got a little bit of Liu Ming here. The image of straw dogs is an important one. Straw dogs were used as effigy offerings to gods at the time. The effigy reminds the sage that the straw dog, though it does not have any true intrinsic value, is a fragment or representation of oneness. For the sage, human beings, like straw dogs, are not precious or meant to be cherished, but they point to the Tao. And he translated the term as ruthless, so then he backpedals a little bit. Though ruthless may seem like a harsh word, it is not used here in an active sense of tormenting others, but in the plain amoral, non-virtuous sense of cultivating non-discrimination, one taste.
One taste.
Yeah, that's become like a cult, right? But it's clearly a description of a kind of fruition of meditation. Right, one taste that is all tastes mixed together. Right, it's sweet and salty and bitter and
Umami.
and all and weird and funky and like if you take all the different descriptions of coffee these days, you just had them all at once.
Or craft beers.
Or craft, yeah. Mixed all coffee and craft beer into one thing. I don't. Isn't it funny that we're living in this world where it's sort of like, I've got more flavor than you, kind of like competitive flavor,
right? Or more flavors.
Yeah,
Just the diversity is.
It's like a competition to appreciate the senses.
One-upmanship.
Yeah. But I think that comes up a lot. I mean, I think that comes up in cultures where people have a lot of leisure time. That idea. I mean, there's definitely a text from the 1700s in China, which is like about how to appreciate the senses. So I think it's actually a trend, cultural trend, a kind of response, a search for meaning. Do I have anything else I was going to report? I've talked a lot. Anybody else got something for me?
I'm looking for a book on Chinese history. Do you have any recommendations?
Chinese history in general?
Ancient, not modern so much, but
Art, archaeology, warfare. What do you want?
I don't know what's out there. I was like, yeah, all that stuff sounds good. Aren't there any just general history, ancient histories on China?
Like a Churchill history of England or China?
I'm going to say no.
Okay. Because I looked, I didn't see much that jumped out at me when I searched.
I could recommend some bad ones, but I wouldn't do that. So, no, but
What's
it's
the bad one? The Reichman, like East Asian tradition, or what? Those are
yeah. I have to go jump through my bookshelf to answer that because they're not on the tip of my tongue. But some of the archaeology books are pretty good. Hang on, let me grab one. Art history books are a really good way
Oh, okay.
because because there's so much, and it tells you this. It does tell the story. So I would suggest actually looking through that lens. And that's something that people in the West have been interested in a long time, and that their informants were pretty good for. Another way to do it is to just look at text. This is the classic Cyril Birch anthology.
Yeah.
And they keep updating this. Like there's new versions of it. And this is a little bit rare, but it's really also really big book and really good. Victor Marr, and he has a co-editor, has one of these collections of literature, and it's really up to date. And it's just it's like a survey course for people who are good readers, you know. It's thick. It's got a ton of texts, but that's kind of a good way to do it because nobody's telling you what the history is, but you're getting these little introductions to actual texts. And that, I would say, is more often how people learn Chinese culture, Chinese history. If they're serious about learning it, they go to the original text. So I can't remember what that one's called, but if you
I'll look up Victor Meyer.
Books edited by Victor Marr, I could probably find it for you. It's in my bibliography of my latest book.
Scott, when you were holding up before books on Taoism, I left the room for a moment. You held up a book, I think it was a greenish cover, or
Taoism, Growth of a Religion.
Oh, that one. What is that one?
That's Isabelle Robinet's survey of Taoist movements, really.
Okay.
It's not so much about how Taoism is practiced, but more about how these social movements developed and interacted over 1,000 years.
And are you familiar with any of the books written by Eva Wong?
Yeah, sure. All of them, yeah.
Is she a good source? Is she?
No.
I didn't think so.
She doesn't know classical. This is what the scholars will tell you. She doesn't know classical Chinese. She thinks she does because she has a Chinese grandmother.
Okay.
And so sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not good.
Right.
And she tends to not have a Taoist view in the sense that she's describing things as methods, not by their fruition.
Right. Okay.
Not by their view.
That makes sense. I haven't read any of her books, but I've
But her feng shui book is pretty cool. I have a feng shui book. It's pretty cool. I mean, it really just shows. I mean, she had a really good Chinese grandmother. Let's put it that way. You know, she got a really interesting overview of the whole subject from and it's smart. I think she'd be a really interesting person to meet. I also held up this one. Were you there for that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So another book is called The Golden Age of Chinese Archaeology, Celebrated Discoveries. You see this? It's taking up the whole screen.
Yeah.
It's really good on early China. There's another one that's about Chu, CHU, that's the same size.
So what?
I mean, look at that. Look at that lantern. And that's like super old, like gold-plated bronze. Again, this is going through art history, but through archaeology, essentially. I don't know what to show you. Oh, it's even got the Mao Huangdui. There's another book like this on Mao Huangdui. Sorry, Xing. What's it called? San Xing Dui. The Three Pits.
That looks Mesoamerican even.
I know. Or alien.
Or alien, yeah.
Yeah, there's a whole book on these guys. I went to see them. It was mind blowing, and I went to the place where I went to San Xing Dui. See it. Yeah, here's another one from San Xing Dui.
Whoa.
Yeah, this broke the art historians when they found these. It broke their history. They're like, forget everything we said.
We need to start over.
Yeah, they just had to start over because they kept saying that like statuary came from Buddhism after Alexander conquered India. That was the art history when I first started looking. And then they discovered these tombs speaking of sacrifice, these guys sacrificed 60 elephants on top of all this stuff. Nobody knows why. Burned. The charred remains of 60 elephants.
That's a big fire.
Yeah, on top of all this bronze. Yeah,
Probably needed a bellows to keep that fire going.
Now we're on. See, here you can see the pictures of it mixed with the bones. Here's the bones and the bronze together. Well, you can't really see it. Yeah, maybe you can.
Yeah, you can see it. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, but that was wild. What else is in here? Goes back really far. Oh, it goes back to the really early pottery too. It's fun.
I saw on Facebook you're doing a kind of historical talk.
Yeah, let's hope we get some people there.
Yeah.
I checked the calendar after setting the time, and it's a Gongshun day, which means it's a total retreat day.
Uh-oh.
I know. Oh, I need to follow my own rules a little better, but I might just do it again. I don't have the network here is the problem. I have the network on Facebook. A lot of people would on Facebook that would come to talk. So Sarah thinks I should do it Facebook Live. So maybe I will.
Quick question, because I don't remember clearly, although I know you've said something about it before. So at one time, there were a lot of elephants in China.
Yeah, elephants and they say giant white tigers too.
Okay. And they wiped out the elephants, pretty much.
And the tigers. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean elephants. What are we supposed to make of that? I guess I'm not an expert at all in the archaeology, so we know mammoths were everywhere, right? And then elephants are like the descendants of mammoths.
Right.
then how widespread are they? Mammoths are everywhere. So why weren't elephants widespread?
Right.
But it's also possible they were imported at that time, but I don't think so. I think they were there.
Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, really. Where did they survive? Maybe they were everywhere, and they only survived. They survived in Africa, where there were large areas that human populations were pretty sparse. And they survived in India, where a large part of the population became vegetarian.
People are interested in joining this group, the first thing to do is to practice sitting still for a month, an hour a day, and reading this chapter of the Daodejing. Just chanting it every day, for really as many times as you want. At least 3 times, I would say. And once you've done that, you'll have an idea whether you really want to join the group, whether you're willing to make the commitment. The commitment beyond that is to come to the talk online or to listen to the video. I record all of them. And we just cover other subjects too. It's pretty broad reaching. I charge $50 a month to be part of that group. And I ask people for a year commitment. And for that, you get access to me. I make myself available to people. Because I think in order to learn this type of meditation, you need to have access to regular feedback, and for me to be able to teach, I need to have some idea what you're experiencing. So, but it's fun. It's fun. It's a fun group, and it's deep. And if you're interested, contact me. And if you like this and just want to donate, hey, Patreon, I've got that in the links below too. And if you have questions, I'm totally available for that. Thanks.